Hey guys, hope you're all well. It's the 4th of December. Here on the allotment, oh God, it's freezing, absolutely freezing. I took some great footage yesterday of me putting all the mustard that I grew this year in these two beds here, loading all that into the compost bin. I showed you that the compost bin had been made 24 hours earlier and it was already producing tons of steam. Bacteria and fungus are really active this time of year, but unfortunately when I set the camera up by the bins it was already recording, and then when I came to do the piece I pressed record and turned the camera off. I just keep doing that, so I've lost some great footage. But the purpose of this video really is talking about composting and alternatives to making compost, because I've got some old footage which I'm going to sort of tag into this. I took it a few months ago, so I'm just going to do a bit of a compilation video now on actually using made compost to dress the beds. For instance, this bed here had the mustard in yesterday, these two which I've chopped down and put into the hot bin. I don't tend to let the mustard, when it gets big, the mustard here was this big, I've got a clip, I'll put it in, been beautiful this year with all the bees and hoverflies on it. It produced a lot of seed which I've saved as well. I'll be growing this again next year, but I prefer when it gets big not to let it compost on the ground, because it'll attract slugs and other creatures that will just infest it, lay eggs and be more prevalent next year. So I prefer to just chop it down and put it in the hot bins, compost it in there, which will be quicker anyway, and then dress the bed with compost, leave the roots of the mustard in to rot down, and that is that. So anyway, let's get on to this video about alternatives to making compost and how to still keep your soil fertile, make your soil fertile and keep your soil happy. I'll cut all this off at ground level and it'll go in the hot compost bin and be rotted down, and then return to the general allotment next year. Obviously this mustard and this mustard will be much easier because it's not flowered, it's not got them big woody stems. The frost will just knock that down and I can simply rake that off the surface. The stems won't be as thick, and just put it into the hot bins. Another green manure which I love growing is rye. I grew rye last year. About this time it was put in the ground, so it was about this tall last year when I put it in. And this year it overwintered, it grew slowly over winter. It starts growing around February really. And this year it got up to about 7 foot tall and I got a massive crop of grain off it. So this grain here in these modules is the rye that I grew this year. Saved the seed and replanted it. Look at the roots in that. These have got to go in today. But the difference is between the rye I grew last year and this rye is the uniformity of the growth on this. It's absolutely amazing compared to what it was last year. Yeah, so there's a lot of, I probably went a little bit overboard with sowing the seed in there. There's a lot of seed, so they will form really big thick clumps. So if you're growing clumps like this clump will probably end up the size of a dinner plate. It will be somewhere around that size of the root ball next year. And all I do is I push the rye over and I just literally cut it about ½ an inch under the surface. And if you sever it there, it kills the rye stone dead. The roots then rot down, give further food for the soil, and that to me is my compost for that bed for that year. That's literally all that bed needs, because the growing plant has already fed the soil and then the roots will continue to feed the soil. Also, as the roots rot down and break down, it leaves great air passages through the soil. The worms move in, the worms and the bacteria and the fungus will then eat the roots that are decaying in the ground. Did that on a bed, on that big rye bed this year. The soil in that bed, believe me guys, this year is absolutely amazing. It is so crumbly. I can put my hand in straight into the soil about 9-10 inches. It's a beautiful texture. Literally within 3 weeks of cutting the rye just under the surface, the roots had rotted. I was able to just pull the tops out, the roots, everything had gone. So this will probably get about this tall by March, and then I'll cut it off and plant my potatoes. All these 4 beds here are growing potatoes, so I'm going to see if there's any big difference between the wireworm damage from the bed with the rye and the bed with the mustard. Now maybe the wireworms will be attracted more to the rye bed because they love grass, the roots of grass, so maybe the wireworms will live in this bed amongst the roots of the rye grain. We'll see. It's going to be a good experiment. Now again, believe it or not, this is another bed of rye grown in clumps. This bed was sown in July, and look at the difference in this. Actually, some of this rye, as you can see, has actually put shoots up and has gone to seed this year. Not all of it has done this, but you see the pollen coming off that. But yeah, some of this rye has put seed out, which I was quite surprised about, really. But the rest of this rye will put its seed out next year, because I'm about, when this vetch goes down here, that's the hairy vetch there with the little flowers on it, great nitrogen fixer. That's why vetch and rye are good companion plants. The vetch puts nitrogen into the soil, the rye takes the nitrogen up out the soil. Brilliant. So yeah, again, grown in clumps. I'll show you the clumps now and how much that they tiller. So you can see this plant here, and there's its root there. Look at that. That's all there is, that little ball of root. But look at the stems that have come up here that have tillered. Each one of these little clumps here, like that one, is an individual rye grain, and it's put maybe 7 or 8 tillers out from that one grain of rye. So that one plant has produced all this growth here. You can see it, and that is just, this is why I plant it like this. It's just so easy to terminate. So I'll take a knife, or you can use an old handsaw really, just cut it off there at the base of the plant. That you have to do that to terminate rye, or as I say, it just keeps growing. And you see the worm life in here, just moving that plant is disturbing the worms. So yeah, that's again grown in clumps all the way across. Doesn't look like it, but it is. And as I said, I firmly believe that having something growing in the ground is much better than having empty ground with compost on top. I really do think that. Soil, plants, symbiotic relationship. Soil hates having nothing growing in it. That's why it grows weeds so readily when the ground is empty. Soil needs something growing in it, and that is a fantastic way of fertilizing your soil and providing additional compost to break down for next year. And everybody could put some rye in. You really don't need very much rye to produce growth like that. You've also got no weed under there. You have got 0 weed growing under that rye now. So you can leave that now until next March. Just leave that bed alone. Let that rye grow over winter. The frost won't kill it. It'll knock it back a bit. It won't kill it. It will start growing again next year. And you can literally cut them humps out, cut them plants out next year. Just go along with the saw or the knife, cut them out and plant whatever you want in there, and there will be no weed under that, I can guarantee. Another fantastic green manure is these are field beans. Again, all these beds here, so we've got the mustard, field beans and the rye. They all follow potatoes, which got blight and came out in July. And a few beans, a few ballotti beans here because I ran out of field bean seed, basically, that's all. But any beans, any legumes are good to grow in the soil because they put a lot of roots down, and they leave little nitrogen nodules on the roots that fix nitrogen in your soil and make plant available nitrogen that doesn't harm the bacteria as well. Chemical nitrogen that you put on, such as Gromor or whatever, actually kills fungus and bacteria. Probably not a lot of people know that. But sometimes the frost, depending on how hard it is, will kill the field beans. Sometimes it doesn't. My plan for this, I'm a bit late really, I'm going to cut the tops off this rye now, because I don't want it any longer really, and you see all the flowers on it. I don't really want it producing beans, because if it does produce beans, then it'll use the nitrogen that it's stored in its roots to grow them beans. So I'd rather the nitrogen stayed in the soil. Once you cut these tops off, they will occasionally put new shoots out the ground, so that'll be an extra benefit for me. But again, field beans, great. And everybody really can grow green manure, can grow field beans, mustard, rye, vetch, whatever you want. Any sort of peas, beans, anything in the soil, because most people on these allotments, once they've had the first crop of everything, the soil just gets left then, and they then spend the next 6 months managing the weed that's growing on that ground. If you're looking for another idea for green manure, this here was all my old seed packets, out of date seed packets and old seed packets, all tipped into a cup, just lots and lots of different seeds. And I literally, because this bed was empty, I had nothing to put in it, I literally scattered them all into this bed, and this is what has grown in this bed. So we've got radish, we've got daikon radish, we've got turnips, we've got beetroot, we have got absolutely God knows what growing in here, but there's bits of cabbage, bits of kale, cauliflowers, all sorts. The bed is absolutely thick and full with vegetation such as that. Well, these aren't grown for food, this has been grown for manure, believe it or not, but we've got food out of it. And I've been surprised really at the proximity of the planting of this, which is seeds just a bed full of seed, handfuls on this bed, how well things have actually grown in it. And this has been like a real surprise for me this year. All sorts of people from the allotments here have been coming and taking like the turnips and the beetroot and the radish and all the things that are growing in here. But what an absolutely amazing bed of compost that is. That is the daikon radish there. I'll try and get that fella out if I can. Yep, so that is daikon radish. I actually grew daikon radish in the end bed last year. Really helps to break the soil up. Where that root is now, that will be into the clay layer on this ground, because the clay is literally a spade deep here, but it's pushing that root in. That void that it's left will be filled with soil, so we're getting a bit of soil into that clay layer, which is of benefit. But what a great compost. And then we've got just some ordinary radish there. It's a really spicy hot, that radish. I don't like radish really, but yeah, a lot of people on the allotments have been raving over this. But again, guys, that's an idea for green manure. Fantastic. There's some Swiss chard there, bit of everything. And here we are at the back, more mustard. This mustard is a little bit earlier again, and you can see the height of it. So this mustard is about 2 weeks older than the mustard that was in front of the beans, which is the biggest mustard at the other end of the allotment. It was probably about this tall. This heavy rain has sort of pushed it down, it pushed it over, but it's stood back up again. You can see the way all these stems are bent. But yeah, that's a lovely, this was probably the ideal time to plant the mustard this year, because this isn't going to go to flower now. It's way too late. But look at the stems, there's plenty of green manure. Them stems are really soft and squishy, so the first frost will flatten this completely, and I'll just rake it off, as I said. Rake the tops off, compost it, and the mustard roots that are in the ground again will rot down. The soil life will consume them, and that will be that bed composted. And that will be that bed composted as well. So looking back down the allotments here at this end, again this bed was empty. It had some late garlic and spring onion in from last year. So all I did, I just planted these borlotti beans in here. That's my thoughts and my alternative solution to, if you can't make enough compost for your ground, just grow something in it. It's probably actually better than putting compost on your soil, believe it or not. It's better having a plant growing in the soil that you want, that you can control, rather than letting a weed grow in the soil. I must say that as well. Because obviously if you allowed weeds to grow and flourish in your soil, they'll set seed, and when you come to plant what you want to grow next year, you'll have all that weed seed coming back up again. So that is the difference. And as I say, most people can grow a crop like this, because once your first crop is finished, your potatoes, your carrots, whatever it is, just get some green manure in. Mustard is a good one, as I said, because it only takes days to come up, and just having it covering the soil is better than nothing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.